chosen one. Pause for a moment, because what you're about to hear is not just another word. It's a mirror, a window, a divine interruption to remind you that your life is not background noise in God's plan. It's frontline testimony. In a generation that chases spectacle, debates, theology, and searches the heavens for signs, God quietly points to you. The world says, "Show us the evidence that God is real." And heaven responds by whispering your name. You're it. You've walked through fire that should have consumed you, faced storms that should have erased you, endured silence so deep it almost convinced you that God had walked away. But you're still here, not broken rebuilt, not hidden anointed. And whether they admit it or not, the ones who doubted, dismissed, or disappeared are watching you now, watching to see if God is still who He says He is. And the answer is written in your breath. Have you ever wondered why your life couldn't look like everyone else's? Why the battles came earlier, the betrayals hit deeper, and the silence lasted longer? It's because your life was never meant to entertain, doubt it, was designed to confront it head on. If you feel something stirring in your spirit, don't let it pass. Type 777 in the comments as your personal confirmation to heaven. I know this word is mine. That number isn't a gimmick, it's a signal, a holy agreement that you recognize the weight of what you carry. And to those of you who've stood with this ministry, whether through a super thanks, a kind message, or a simple prayer, I see you, and I thank you from the depths of my heart. Your support allows this divine message to reach those who didn't even know they were starving for it. But don't keep this moment to yourself. Hit that like, share, and subscribe or not, just because it helps the message spread, but because someone connected to you is silently searching for proof that God still cares. And what if your decision to share this is the very answer they've been begging God for in private? This is more than content. It's confirmation. You see, when people doubt God, they don't always voice it. They show it in the way they numb themselves, in the way they chase the temporary, in how they disconnect from anything sacred. But God doesn't panic. He doesn't shout from the sky. He simply lets your story unfold, because every breakthrough, every healed wound, every time you chose grace instead of revenge, it all became the quiet, undeniable response to their loudest unbelief. Do you realize just how many people are still alive today because you decided to keep walking when everything in you wanted to quit? You didn't come here to escape your pain. You came here to understand your purpose. And right now, God is about to reveal how every chapter of your life, especially the ones you never wanted to write, have been leading to this sacred unveiling. In the next 7 divine revelations, you'll understand why you were never just surviving. You were testifying, and why the world's doubt will never outweigh the power of your divine evidence. So tell me this. What if the reason they doubted God was because they hadn't met you yet? Get still. Get ready. Let's go deeper. God's chosen ones. When people doubt God, your life is the answer. Chapter 1. You survived what should have destroyed you. They thought you wouldn't last the night, and if truth were told, some part of you wasn't sure either. Chosen one. Let's start with the truth. Others don't want to admit your survival is a confrontation to their unbelief. You're not standing because the storm skipped over you. You're standing because God walked into the storm with you and refused to walk out without you. How many nights did you wrestle with silence so loud it felt like punishment? How many days did you show up when your soul was screaming for rest? The trials you faced were not gentle, they were soul-breaking, dignity-stripping, faith-testing storms. And yet, through it all, something holy kept you breathing. Why didn't you become the thing they accused you of? Why didn't the weight of rejection twist you into resentment, like Job, who lost everything in one breath and still whispered, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Job 13:15. Your faith was not shallow, it was crucified and resurrected. You endured what leaves most people emotionally disfigured. You smiled while bleeding. You served while empty. You forgave while still aching. Isn't that the kind of miracle we often overlook? You didn't survive because you were unbreakable. You survived because God refused to let your breaking be the end of your becoming. In Exodus 13:13 and untelantes, God says, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." But rest, for you, wasn't about sleep. It was the supernatural restoration that came when your spirit collapsed into the arms of grace. Your survival was never luck, it was divine strategy. The same strategy that kept Daniel's mind sound while surrounded by lions, Daniel 6:22. They waited to see your faith unravel in adversity, but all they saw was you becoming more resolute, more dangerous to darkness. Have you ever noticed how people get quiet when you rise again? Could it be because your endurance makes them question the gods they placed their hope in? Painter Makoto Fujimura, a contemporary Japanese-American artist known for integrating faith and trauma through beauty, once said, "Art born from suffering carries eternal weight." Your life is exactly that, a sacred canvas where God painted redemption with the colors of your pain, and like his kintsugi-inspired gold that mends broken pottery, you've been sealed by something far more precious than shame. There's a woman named Damarisa, single mother, who was left by her partner the same week she lost her job. With 2 kids and eviction on the horizon, she began leaving anonymous prayers in hotel Bibles while applying to cleaning shifts. Years later, she runs a non-profit for abused women, and none of her employees even know the pain she came from. Her life doesn't shout her, scarce it serves from them. Just like you, you're like the tree whose roots gripped tighter as the winds roared louder. The drought didn't kill you, deepened you. What if your survival is the answer someone else has been praying for? What if someone doubting God is about to see him clearly through you? When Elijah thought he was alone, ready to die under the broom tree, God whispered, not in fire or earthquake, but in a still, small voice. 1 Kings 19:12. That same whisper became your lifeline in the night seasons, the ones no one saw, the ones you're finally starting to speak about. The evidence of God's presence in your life isn't in what you gained, but in what didn't kill you. When people ask, "Where was God?" the answer is wrapped in your breath, your persistence, your rebirth. You are the testimony that's still breathing. You are the psalm that didn't end at lament. You are the victory that never made headlines, but heaven kept records. You, chosen one, are not just someone who made it out. You are someone God carried through and left traces of himself on. And now that you've survived what was meant to end you, let's talk about the kind of miracle that doesn't make headlines, the kind that doesn't part seas or raise the dead in front of crowds, the kind of miracle that takes place inside the wilderness of your mind, when no one's clapping and no one's watching. Chosen one, your survival wasn't subtle because it lacked power. It was sacred because it revealed who God is when no one else shows up. Why do they always assume that miracles have to be loud? Have they forgotten that some of God's most powerful moves happened in the silence, in the whisper, in the cave? What if the miracle wasn't the fire being extinguished, but the fact that you walked through it and didn't lose your voice. Just like the 3 Hebrew boys in Daniel 3:25, where Nebuchadnezzar said, "I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed." You too came out of the furnace, not even smelling like smoke. What you endured should have scorched your compassion, but it refined your character instead. How can someone walk through loss and still radiate love? How can someone be overlooked for years and still show up with excellence? You weren't just kept alive. You were being deepened. The delays that felt like punishment were actually divine development. Psalms 1-3 says, "They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in season." But trees don't shout while they grow. They stretch downward first, and in that same way, you were expanding in places no one could see. There's a story told of a man named Elias, a street sweeper in a forgotten city, who used to recite one scripture under his breath every night: "I will not die but live, and will proclaim what the Lord has done." Psalm 118-17. After a decade of being invisible, he was chosen by a local school to speak at a graduation because the principal said she always saw him praying before dawn while cleaning the campus gates. That day, he didn't shout. He simply smiled and said, "God hears prayers that have no microphone." Sometimes the real miracle isn't escape, it's endurance. Have you ever wondered why they still can't explain you? They saw the disappointment, the rejection, the breakdowns, but they don't know about the divine insulation around your spirit. They saw you lose jobs, friendships, chances, but they never saw you lose your soul. How do you still radiate joy after such bitter seasons? Why are you still dreaming when life gave you every reason to surrender? Activist and educator Erin Gruel, who inspired the Freedom Writers, once said, "Sometimes the people who suffer the most become the ones who teach the world how to heal." You've become a vessel of that same quiet authority. You didn't just escape heartbreak, you excavated healing from within it. You didn't just leave the cave, you came out holding tools for someone else's deliverance. Your survival wasn't passive, it was defiant hope in motion. When others were breaking down, you were building inner altars. When others were retreating, you were rehearsing promises God made to you in secret. That's why you haven't lost your light. You've just learned to carry it like a lantern in the dark. You've become like the ocean, tide gentle but persistent, unseen in its shifts, but undeniable in its reach. You lost things. Relationship dissolved. Time was stolen. Moments passed that you can never get back. But you didn't lose you. What remained was the most dangerous version of you, whole, wise, and walking in quiet authority. That's what baffles them. That's why they stare. They saw what you went through, but not who was walking through it with you. When people ask, "Where was God during your hardest hour?" they won't need a sermon. They'll only need to see your life. Just like the blind man in John 9:25, who said, "One thing I do know, I was blind and now I see." You are that sentence, living and breathing. Your existence dismantles their doubt. Your joy unsettles their certainty. And your peace, it confronts their unbelief like thunder in a quiet room. And now you're stepping into the place that once seemed impossible. The storm didn't cancel your promise, it built your capacity to carry it. You're no longer just surviving. You're stepping into the portion that was always yours. And the miracle now is not that you made it out, but that you're about to walk in with wisdom, vision, and divine fire. Chapter 2. Your rise makes no natural sense. You didn't arrive here through the traditional routes. You didn't climb a golden ladder or inherit a legacy lined with comfort. chosen one. Your journey defies logic because it wasn't designed by human logics. It was orchestrated by divine intention. Take a long look at your story, not just where you are now, but where you came from, who you were supposed to be, who you were expected to remain, and how you keep rising anyway. How do you explain favor that ignores qualifications? How do you explain doors opening where there were only walls before? There are people who studied longer, planned smarter, networked harder, and yet they're still trying to find the keys to doors that opened for you without an invitation. What made you stand out when you didn't even know your name was being mentioned? Psalm 75:6-7 makes it plain. For promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south, but God is the judge. He putteth down one, and setteth up another. They didn't choose you, heaven did. And that makes all the difference. They had mentors. You had spiritual warfare. They had inherited networks. You had inherited trauma. They had safety nets. You had prayers spoken through clenched teeth, but still you rose. Why? Because elevation in the kingdom doesn't follow the rules of empire. You were called when no one else saw you. You were prepared in obscurity, and now, when your name is whispered in rooms of influence, they can't figure out how you got there, just like David, the overlooked shepherd boy anointed to be king, 1 Samuel 16. You weren't the obvious choice. You were the God choice. He chose you in secret so that no man could take credit for your success. Isn't it wild how some tried to delete your destiny before it even started? Isn't it humbling how even their sabotage worked in reverse, pushing you deeper into the arms of purpose? There's a man named Ruel who grew up in a foster system, shuffled from home to home, labeled emotionally unstable, with no money, no degree, and no family. He started writing songs in subway stations. One night, a music professor heard his voice, wept, and helped produce his first album. Years later, he became a sought-after film composer. People asked him what label launched his career. He answered, "It wasn't a label. It was a word God whispered into my brokenness." That's the kind of rise that confuses the natural mind. Have you ever felt the pressure to explain yourself, as if your path needed permission to exist? Have you ever stood in a place of honor and felt like an outsider, simply because your journey didn't follow the script? That's because your success was written in the ink of surrender, not the ink of status. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order and a former soldier turned mystic, once said, "He who goes about to reform the world must begin with himself, or he loses his labor." You did that. You submitted before you succeeded. You healed in private before speaking in public. You sacrificed applause to cultivate depth. And now, everything the world called weakness is being redefined as strength. People thought your humility was a lack of ambition. They misread your silence as absence. But what they didn't know was that you were in the back, building an altar. You were in the shadows, being instructed by heaven, and just like Joseph, falsely accused and forgotten in prison, you were positioned for the palace by what others meant to break you. Genesis 41:14. Could it be that every rejection was divine redirection? What happens when God promotes someone without credentials? What happens when the table prepared before your enemies is bigger than your plans ever dared to dream? You didn't strategize this outcome, you surrendered into it. And your obedience disrupted every earthly equation. You're like a river that carved a path through solid rock, not because it forced its way through, but because it kept flowing. Nothing in your background explained this rise. And yet, here you are walking in rooms where the language of grace is louder than any resume. Isaiah 60:22 says, "When the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen." That's what this season is. A holy collision between heaven's timing and your yielded posture. They tried to delay you, but they couldn't undo what God already decreed. You weren't elevated by exposure. You were extracted from obscurity. God pulled you from the hidden places, not because you were loud, but because you were ready. This rise isn't about being seen, it's about being sent. Not because you were loud, but because you were loyal. Not because you were perfect, but because you were chosen. That's the part they can't comprehend, how someone with no blueprint, no advantage, and no platform could carry so much weight and still remain humble. Chosen one. You didn't climb your way here by shouting for attention. You were summoned by the one who heard your whisper behind closed doors. Your rise isn't noisy. It's sacred. It's prophetic. It's proof that divine power moves differently than human promotion. Why are you still progressing when the system wasn't designed for people like you? Why does your name still surface when others try to erase it? The truth is, they've been asking the wrong questions. It's not about the steps you took, it's about the one who ordered them. Psalm 37:23. The method was fire. The source was God. Like Esther, who was chosen not because she had the loudest voice, but because she had the right heart at the right moment. Esther 4:14. You were raised for such a time as this. Your favor didn't start when people applauded. It started when you said yes to the assignment no one else saw. When others were sleeping, you were surrendering. When others were climbing, you were consecrating. A woman named Leontine, once a corrections officer in a rural town, began writing anonymous letters of encouragement to inmates she saw struggling emotionally. Over years, her quiet words reached hundreds. One day, a former prisoner found her in a grocery store and said, "You're the reason I believed God hadn't forgotten me." No one knew what she was doing in secret, but heaven did. That's the kind of elevation that can't be orchestrated by effort. It has to be birthed in obedience. Have you noticed how your presence makes some people uncomfortable even when you're silent? Could it be that your life reveals what their ambition can't replicate? Could it be that your peace is louder than their performance? Could it be that the oil you carry came at a cost they were never willing to pay? Saint Teresa of Avila, a Spanish mystic and reformer of the Carmelite order, once said, "God walks among the pots and pans." In other words, holiness isn't always found in pulpits. It shows up in kitchens, in quiet service, in ordinary obedience. That's your story. You didn't rise from the stage. You rose from the sacred mundane. And because of that, your elevation is not just a blessing, it's a signpost for those still hidden in the dark. Romans 11:29 declares, "For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable." What God spoke over your life can't be vetoed by opinions, policies, or powers. And now, the very ones who doubted if you'd make it are witnessing a resurrection they can't deny. You don't owe them an explanation. You are the explanation. You are what it looks like when grace writes the ending instead of fear. You are what it looks like when fire doesn't destroy, it refines. When God's hand is on someone, even silence becomes strategy. Even delay becomes preparation. Even rejection becomes redirection. You're like the sunrise after a brutal storm, unexpected, radiant, undeniable. You didn't break through because you were louder. You broke through because your roots went deeper than they ever knew. You grew in the dark. You prayed through the pressure. You stood when others sat down. And now your life is a living answer to the question so many have dared to ask. Does God still raise people in this generation? Yes, and He started with you. So keep rising even when it unsettles the room. Keep obeying even when obedience costs you visibility. Because what God is building through you isn't just for your legacy, it's for others watching, wondering if heaven still intervenes in human stories. Your rise isn't accidental, it's architectural. And the blueprint? It was written in heaven before time ever touched your name. Chapter 3. You carry a peace that can't be bought. Chosen one. What you carry disturbs the world because it didn't come from the world. There is a stillness in you that cannot be imitated, replicated, or sold. It is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of God. And it's what makes you dangerous in a world built on panic. They don't know how to name it, but they feel it. The room changes when you walk in. The atmosphere softens when you speak. What is it about you that doesn't collapse when everything else does? Why is your silence more powerful than their shouting? Why do you radiate calm in rooms where anxiety reigns? What you carry didn't come from applause. It came from agony, from praying through pain no one saw, from nights where your tears outnumbered your words. Your peace wasn't inherited, it was wrestled for, like Jacob in Genesis 32, who wrestled all night and came out with a limp and a blessing. You too walk differently, now not because of victory alone, but because of the cost. The world is addicted to noise. It sells urgency, manufactures anxiety, and packages chaos as connection. But you've chosen the slower, quieter, holier path. You've learned what Jesus taught in John 14:27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. This isn't circumstantial calm. This is covenant stillness. And it confuses people who only know peace as the fruit of control. There's a woman named Amara, a pediatric nurse in a trauma center. After losing her own child, she returned to work just weeks later, not out of numbness, but compassion. Her co-workers couldn't understand how she sang hymns while treating wounded children, but Amara would smile and say, "Peace isn't what happens around mates who lives inside me." Some thought she was fragile. They didn't know she was fortified. Why do you still speak gently after being shouted at? Why do you carry softness where the world expects bitterness? Why do you extend grace when you had every reason to shut down? Because you've encountered the God who calms seas with a whisper. Mark 4:39. And now that whisper echoes through you. Saint John of the Cross, a Spanish mystic who endured imprisonment and rejection for his devotion, once wrote, "The soul that is quick to turn to speaking and conversing is slow to turn to God." You've done the opposite. You turned inward. You turned upward. And in that place of solitude, you found serenity. You discovered that true peace isn't passive, it's militant. It holds its ground. It refuses to flinch. It doesn't perform. It anchors. You didn't find it in comfort, you forged it in war. The battlefield was your own mind. And every time you chose worship over worry, you gained ground. There's a man named Adric, a former Marine who became a high school janitor after surviving PTSD and losing everything. Every morning before sunrise, he'd clean the floors humming, "It is well with my soul." Students began to notice that he remembered every name, encouraged every kid, and never seemed rattled. When asked why, he simply replied, "Peace isn't what I wait for, it's what I protect." They never expected wisdom to come from the broom closet. But that's what real peace does, it shows up in hidden places. And you, chosen one, have become a sanctuary in motion. While others live as sirens of fear, you've become a lighthouse of assurance. You don't just carry peace, you are peace clothed in skin. You've suffered without becoming sour. You've wept without becoming weak. You've lost without losing yourself. Isaías 26, 3 declares, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you." You are not at peace because life is easy. You are at peace because you trust a God who transcends it. Every loss taught you to hold heaven tighter. Every delay became a deeper lesson in stillness. And now, you walk like someone who has been kissed by glory in private. So, no. Your peace isn't a performance. It's a possession, one the world cannot buy, break, or bargain for. That's not weakness. That's power. That's the kind of authority that doesn't need noise to be noticed. Chosen one. The enemy's intention was to fracture your soul, to scatter your focus, to poison your joy, to dismantle your sanity. But instead, you became grounded, solid, deeply centered in a peace that cannot be outsourced. This is why you're a threat, not because you shout louder, but because you no longer shake. They tried to destabilize you with betrayal, loss, delays, and detours, but nothing worked. Why? Because once a soul is anchored in God, no storm can unroot it. Psalm 46, 5 declares, God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. That's not poetry, that's prophecy fulfilled in your life. You're not operating in emotional survival anymore. You're walking in spiritual stillness. That's more terrifying to darkness than any warfare scream. Have you ever noticed how people begin to soften around you, as if their frantic energy hits a wall of calm? They don't always know how to articulate it, but what they sense is not personality. It's presence, the residue of communion, the weight of someone who has suffered in silence and still kept their worship intact. That's what makes your peace holy. There's a man named Tobias, an ex-investment banker who lost everything in a financial scandal, not because he was guilty, but because he was framed. After a season of suicidal depression, he began tending a small vineyard in the countryside. When asked why he didn't return to corporate life after being proven innocent, he simply replied, "Because I found God in the soil, not the spotlight." Today, people drive for hours to sit under the trees near his land, not for wine, but for conversation. They say the air there feels different. That's what peace does, it sanctifies places without speaking. How do you keep calm when everything around you is chaos? How do you keep extending kindness when life keeps extracting comfort? How can you look into the eyes of those who wronged you and not flinch? Because your roots aren't planted in applause. They're planted in the unchanging nature of a faithful God. And once roots go deep enough, fruit starts speaking louder than explanations. Saint Seraphim of Sarov, a 19th century Russian mystic known for his intense spiritual discipline and radiant gentleness, once said, "Acquire the spirit of peace, and thousands around you will be saved." That's exactly what you've done. Without trying to fix the world, you've become a place of restoration. Without shouting scripture, you've become living evidence of it. You've survived the kind of war that leaves people numb, yet you emerged wise. You've endured storms that should have broken your rhythm, yet you remain in sync with heaven. And that's why you don't panic when others do. Your trust isn't theoretical, it's muscle memory now. John 16:33 reminds us, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." This peace isn't just emotional equilibrium, it's spiritual evidence that the overcomer lives in you. Your stillness is not denial, it's discernment. You know when to speak, and when to stay silent, when to move, and when to rest, when to fight, and when to let heaven intervene. A woman named Zofia, a midwife in post-war Poland, was once held hostage during a siege. In the middle of gunfire, she delivered twins while whispering Psalm 91. When asked later how she remained so calm, she said, "Because my hands were working, but my soul was hidden in God." That's the kind of peace you now carry, a dimension of rest forged through fire, sealed in intimacy. And when someone looks at your stillness and asks, "Where does it come from?" they're not really asking about you. They're asking about the presence they can't define but can't deny. Let them look deeper. Let them feel it in your tone, your timing, your tears. Let your existence become the answer to their unspoken ache for rest. Because what they're seeing is not an emotion, it's an inheritance. Peace that can't be bought. Peace that can't be copied. Peace that cannot be faked, only given by the one who called you his own. Chapter 4. You forgave what broke you. Chosen one. Let's tell the truth. Most people aren't ready to admit forgiveness is not easy. It is holy. And what you've done by choosing to forgive isn't just rare, it's divine. Your ability to release what nearly ruined you is not a personality trait. It's spiritual maturity. It is one of the loudest declarations that God is alive inside of you. People see your peace now, but they don't see the war it cost you. They don't know what you had to let go of, the betrayal that blindsided you, the manipulation that twisted truth, the moments you questioned your own reality. And worse, some of the people who inflicted the pain walked away like nothing happened. How do you release what left you bleeding with no apology? How do you forgive someone who never asks for it? You've done it not once, but again and again, and not because it made sense, not because it felt fair, but because you understood something higher. Bitterness is bondage, and God didn't raise you to be chained to what tried to destroy you. You didn't forgive because they earned it. You forgave because your future demanded it. Joseph, the son of Jacob, knew this in Genesis 50 to 19:21. After being betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and forgotten in prison, he rose to power in Egypt. When given the chance for revenge, he wept and said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to save many lives." That's not just a story, it's your echo. Your healing didn't erase what happened, but it made what happened powerless to define you. There's a woman named Serena, once a prosecuting attorney, who resigned to work in restorative justice after the man who killed her husband expressed repentance from prison. She now facilitates healing circles between offenders and victims' families. When asked why she walked away from the system she once fought for, she said, "Because justice without mercy just recycles pain." That's what the world doesn't understand. Your forgiveness isn't weakness, it's weaponized mercy. Why didn't you retaliate? Why didn't you let vengeance speak on your behalf? Why didn't you post your pain? Expose their betrayal? Scorch the earth with the receipts? Because you no longer move from ego, you move from eternity. You understood what Jesus meant in Luke 23:34 when he prayed on the cross. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." That prayer wasn't passive. It was power cloaked in compassion. Your release was rebellion, rebellion against bitterness, trauma loops, and the demonic strategy of spiritual stagnation. Because unforgiveness doesn't just hurt your heart, it halts your destiny. You chose to rise. and that rise required surrender. Saint Augustine of Hippo, the theologian whose writings shaped much of Christian doctrine, once said, "Resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. You didn't just survive poison, you refused to serve it to your future. You made peace a priority, even when pain screamed for vengeance." There's a man named Micah, a former gang member who lost his brother in a shooting by a rival. Years later, he started mentoring the very neighborhood that raised the killer. When asked how he found the strength, he said, "Because I still had love in me and I refused to bury it beside my brother." That's the kind of radical mercy you've been walking in. It's not logical. It's supernatural. How do you love without retaliation? How do you bless those who bruised you? How do you speak life over people who spoke death over you? Because your intimacy with God trained your soul to release before rot could take root. Forgiveness doesn't mean you approve of what happened. It means you're no longer enslaved to it. Isaiah 43, 18-19 says, "Forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing." You couldn't receive the new thing God had for you if you kept bowing to the weight of what broke you. And now, the world watches you walk in freedom without bitterness, without vengeance, without chains. You forgave. Not because they asked, but because you were anointed, and because you know the same mercy that saved you has now flowed through you. You didn't just forgive people who apologized. You forgave those who acted like they were the victim, those who distorted your story to protect their image, those who whispered behind your back while smiling to your face. And even then you chose release. You chose light. Chosen one. That wasn't emotional convenience. That was supernatural obedience. What do you call it when someone walks through fire and refuses to throw sparks? What do you call it when a wounded heart chooses to beat with compassion instead of contempt? That's not natural. That's not cultural. That's kingdom. You've loved when logic said, "Shut down." You've remained soft when the world told you to harden. And every time someone sees you extend kindness after rejection, they're not just witnessing personality, they're encountering prophecy. Your life has become a portal of redemption, a living sermon that whispers to wounded souls. Healing is still possible. Restoration is still real. Jesus said in Matthew 5:44, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." He wasn't giving a suggestion, he was unveiling a strategy, because love dismantles darkness more thoroughly than vengeance ever could. And you, chosen one, I have chosen love, even when it cost you your ego. There's a man named Elijah Wren, a war photographer who lost his sister to a hate crime. Instead of withdrawing, he started a global campaign called Frames of Forgiveness, capturing stories of reconciliation around the world. His work has been displayed in refugee camps and government summits alike. In one interview, he said, "We heal when we let grace interrupt the cycle of revenge." And that's what you've done. You let grace interrupt generational pain. How do you still serve when people dishonor you? How do you stay open after being exploited? How do you reflect heaven after being dragged through hell? Because forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's transmuting. It's taking pain and turning it into intercession. It's releasing judgment and carrying mercy as your mantle. The story of Stephen in Acts 7 shows us this. As he was being stoned to death, he cried out, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." That wasn't weakness, it was warfare. That's what you've done. You didn't just survive offense, you disarmed it. And every time someone dares to ask, "How are you still so kind?" They don't realize they're asking about God. Because your heart is no longer just human, it's been immersed in something holy. You are the proof that the cross didn't just forgive since it reconfigured how love works through human vessels. Saint Edith Stein, a Jewish philosopher who converted to Christianity and died a martyr, once said, "Do not accept anything as truth that lacks love, and do not accept anything as love that lacks truth." You've lived that paradox. Your forgiveness hasn't been soft, it's been sharp. It hasn't been vague, it's been vivid with boundaries and clarity. There's a woman named Jael, a former cult survivor who later became a trauma-informed therapist. Her abuser never faced justice, but she built a practice helping others exit coercive systems. When asked if forgiveness meant she'd forgotten the harm, she said, "No, it means I refuse to carry his sin in my soul." That's what you've done. You've let go. Not out of amnesia, but out of alignment with heaven. And because you released the weight, God is now elevating the witness. Psalm 24:3-4 says, "Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart. Forgiveness purified your heart so that favor could find you." Your surrender became scaffolding for divine elevation. You've become like the tree that continues to bloom even after a harsh winter, not because the cold didn't come, but because its roots grew deeper beneath the frost. What they thought would bury you only anchored you. What they hoped would silence you became your song. And that song is now echoing in places you never imagined you'd reach. So yes, your forgiveness was personal, but it's also prophetic. It's generational. It's systemic. It's a loud declaration in the spirit that no pain will be recycled here. No bitterness will take root. No darkness will distort your destiny. And now, because you chose heaven's way, you are being lifted by the same God who knelt beside you when no one else did. Chapter 5. Your faith defied facts. Chosen one. Your story is not logical, it's living proof that the supernatural overrides the statistical. Every detail of your journey whispers rebellion not against truth, but against the illusion that facts have the final word. From the beginning, people labeled your future based on what was missing. No connections, no support, no certainty. They wrote you off as another invisible life, destined to survive, not thrive. But they didn't calculate your faith. They didn't factor in the invisible fire that God deposited inside your chest. Because while the facts were loud, faith was louder. Have you ever walked into rooms where you knew you didn't meet the criteria but somehow still got called to the front? Have you ever stood on ground that facts said you'd never reach? That's because faith does what data can't. It bends reality to bow before divine intention. Like Abraham in Romans 4:18. Against all hope. Abraham in hope believed. That wasn't stubborn optimism. That was covenant conviction. And just like him, you looked at barrenness and still said, "But God." The environment didn't affirm your dream. The circumstances denied your promise. But you obeyed anyway. There's a young man named Malik who grew up in a refugee camp with no schooling and no citizenship. By salvaging thrown-away electronics, he taught himself engineering and later developed water filtration systems that now serve communities across 2 continents. When asked how he kept going, he answered, "Because I believed my limitations were temporary, but my calling was eternal." That's what you carry too, a relentless expectation that refuses to die in dry places. Why did you keep building when there were no resources? Why did you keep believing when the deadline had passed? Why did you keep applying, showing up, trusting, when the world said no so many times? Because what was inside you wasn't tied to circumstance, it was tethered to covenant. The world calls it delusion. Heaven calls it dangerous faith. Your belief wasn't naive, it was prophetic. Every time you declared healing while pain screamed in your body, every time you sowed generosity in seasons of lack, you declared war on natural law. You made the spiritual realm more real than what your senses reported. In 2 Corinthians 5-7, Paul writes, "For we live by faith, not by sight. And you, chosen one, have lived that truth until it became muscle memory. You didn't ignore the facts, you overruled them with tears in your eyes. You still spoke in future tense, with bills unpaid. You still tithed, with betrayal fresh. You still trusted that goodness was chasing you." Saint Hubli, Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German mystic, composer, and healer, once said, "The soul is kissed by God in its innermost regions." Your faith came from that sacred kiss, not from sermons alone, but from stillness, from encounters, from whispered promises in midnight hours that no one else heard. There's a woman named Louisa, abandoned as a child and raised in shelters, who dreamed of becoming a doctor even though she could barely read until age 12. She kept studying, using discarded textbooks and online tutorials at public libraries. Today, she leads mobile clinics across underserved areas. When asked how she got there, she said, "I just kept believing that God's plan for me was bigger than my beginning." That's what you've lived too. A beginning that didn't predict your breakthrough, but God did. Even nature knows this paradox. Consider the desert bloom flowers that erupt from scorched ground after years of drought. Botanists can't always explain why they survive, but they do. That's your story too. You didn't bloom because conditions were ideal. You bloomed because obedience made a way. So yes, your prayers weren't loud, but they were lethal. Your worship wasn't staged, but it shifted atmospheres. You kept knocking on doors with scraped-up knuckles and unwavering hope. You weren't pretending, it was persistence. And the truth is, you didn't always know how, but you always knew who. That's what distinguished you. You lived like the promise was already printed in heaven, and you kept showing up until earth caught up. People assumed your story would end where it started. They predicted your outcome based on your origin. But chosen one, what they didn't realize was that your beginning was never the blueprint, your belief was. While they measured your potential by visible metrics, heaven measured it by the hidden covenant written over your life. They thought your background would limit your trajectory. They didn't see how your faith was quietly tearing ceilings off generational narratives, what they called improbable. God called inevitable. What they called limitation, God called launchpad. You turned poverty into platform, pain into prophecy, delay into disciplina. How do you explain favor that followed no formula? How do you explain momentum that came without marketing, positioning, or pedigree? It was never about who you networked with. It was about who you walked with. And you walked with God when the road wasn't paved, when the map was blank, when all you had was a whisper and a worn-out pair of shoes, just like Peter walking on water in Matthew 14:29. You stepped out when logic screamed, "Stay." You kept walking step by trembling step because your trust was greater than your fear. Faith gave you permission to defy physics. And that's why people can't explain you. There's a woman named Mireia who survived political exile and spent her childhood in a displaced community. Despite no formal education, she became a legal advocate for stateless children. She once said, I didn't follow opportunity, I followed obedience. And opportunity followed me. That's what you've lived too. You didn't chase influence. You chased instruction. Why didn't you break when you were alone? Why didn't you settle when no one affirmed you? Why did you keep building when no blueprint was given? Because you understood that faith doesn't wait for confirmation, it is the confirmation. You trusted the invisible until it became visible. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." And every inch of your story drips with that evidence. You are the embodiment of things once unseen now, standing in full color. They see the harvest but they don't know the heartbreak. They see the fruit but they never saw the fallow seasons when the soil of your life looked barren. There's a man named Cohen, once homeless and addicted, who began writing poetry in subway tunnels. Years later, one of his poems went viral online and became the basis of a mental health campaign in 6 countries. When asked about his transformation, he said, "The streets didn't save me. The word I whispered while starving did." That's the power of unseen belief. It incubates destiny in places despair was supposed to reign. Your life, chosen one, is not rational, it's revolutionary. It doesn't obey the rules of society. It bends to the rhythms of grace. It disrupts their equations and breaks their assumptions. And yes, they may try to explain your journey using logic, but your life won't fit in their frameworks. You're like the eagle that builds its nest on cliffs where no predator can climb. Your elevation came from your refusal to nest in shallow approval. You soared where others waited for conditions to align. You moved at the command of the wind, Ruach, the breath of God. John 11 reminds us that Lazarus was dead for 4 days beyond hope, beyond logic. And yet Jesus called him forth. That's your life. You weren't just delayed. You were being preserved for a public resurrection. Your story is not about survival, it's about surge. The kind only heaven initiates, so let them try to decode the details. Let them theorize, calculate, predict. They'll never figure it out, because what they don't understand is that facts may form the valley, but faith builds the bridge across it. And your faith, it didn't just carry you across, it rewrote the map. Chapter 6. You changed without losing who you are. Chosen one. There's a rare kind of transformation that leaves people speechless. Not because of how much you've changed, but because of how much of your essence remained untouched. You endured a crucible, but didn't melt into someone unrecognizable. You evolved, but didn't erase it. And that is a holy wonder. What do you call someone who has every reason to be cold, yet remains warm? Every reason to shut down, yet stays open? Every reason to hate, yet keeps loving? That's not just resilience. That's redemption in motion. And it's exactly what your life carries. How did you remain anchored while everything around you shifted? How did you keep your gentleness when you were surrounded by cruelty? How did you remain authentic in a world that rewards the artificial? These are the questions they can't answer, because your life doesn't follow the patterns they understand. You weren't molded by the world. You were refined by God. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." That's what happened to you. You didn't conform, you renewed. You didn't replicate what hurt you, you released it. You didn't recycle pain, you resurrected purpose. The story of Joseph echoes through your journey. Genesis 50, sold by his brothers, falsely accused, forgotten in prison. He had every human reason to lose himself in bitterness. But when he stood before the same brothers who betrayed him, he wept not in anger, but in mercy. He said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." That was not the voice of revenge. That was the voice of someone who changed without losing who he truly was. And that is you. Many lose themselves trying to survive what you survived. They toughen their exterior and in the process lose their light. But you allowed pain to prune you, not poison you. You didn't let grief define you. You let it deepen you. You didn't trade empathy for edge. You kept the softness that hell itself tried to harden. Here's something they don't teach. It takes far more strength to stay tender in a world that rewards apathy than it does to become numb. And yet, you've done it. There's a quiet depth to you now, a calm knowing, an invisible dignity that radiates from a soul refined not by success but by surrender. There's a moment in the Gospels that mirrors your experience. In Luke 10, Jesus sends out his disciples like lambs among wolves, and yet they returned with joy, not trauma. Why? Because the presence that sent them out sustained them. That's what preserved you too. You were sent not to become like the world, but to remain a sign that light can still endure. Artist and activist Ai Weiwei, known for his political resistance and fearless truth-telling in the face of oppressive regimes, once said, "I don't want to live in another person's dream. I want to stay awake in my own." You've lived that. You didn't fall asleep in survival mode. You stayed awake in the story God was writing through you. And then there's Jamal, a counselor who once battled addiction and homelessness. Most assumed he'd hardened to survive. But every week, he visits shelters not to preach, but to listen. You can't speak light if you forget what darkness sounds like. He says, his story moves people, not because he changed, but because he changed without losing the part of him that still weeps for others. What if your evolution was never meant to erase your past, but redeem it? What if every time someone expected to meet a version of you destroyed by pain, they instead encountered a soul that has been purified by fire? You are not what happened to you. You are who you chose to become in spite of it. You are like the river that carved its way through stone, unchanged in essence, but powerful in form, not hardened like rock, not scattered like mist, but focused, fluid, and free. This kind of change is not cosmetic, it's catalytic. It shifts atmospheres, and people are noticing. Why do you still lead with love when the world taught you to lead with fear? Why do you still serve when no one applauds you? Why does your presence bring peace even to those who once rejected you? Because you haven't just healed, you've been held. You haven't just survived, you've been shaped. You haven't just changed, you've remembered who you truly are. It takes divine precision to emerge from deep waters with your soul intact. And yet here you are, proof that the Spirit of God didn't just walk with you, He walked within you. Because only the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit can carry someone through betrayal, grief, injustice, and silence without allowing bitterness to stain their soul. Who keeps loving when their love has been taken for granted? Who chooses to stay soft when hardness would be easier? Who still gives freely when they once bled alone? You did. You had every logical reason to shut yourself off. The trauma you endured could have become your personality. The heartbreak could have rewritten your instincts. The disappointment could have bred cynicism. And yet, you chose another way, a higher way. Isaiah 55:9 says, "For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways." That's the realm you operated from. Instead of building fortresses around your heart, you dug wells of living water. You opened your inner world to healing, not hiding. You didn't seek comfort in control. You sought cleansing in communion. There were nights you prayed, prayers soaked in anguish. Nights when you whispered, "God, don't let this change who I am." Nights like Gethsemane, when Jesus cried out, "Not my will, but yours be done." Luke 22:42. You echoed those words, not just once, but continually, not just in public, but in the raw, secret places of your soul. And God responded not with applause, but with refinement. He didn't just lift the burden, He taught your shoulders how to carry glory. He didn't just restore your balance, He transformed your walk. He didn't just mend your wounds, He made you a vessel for healing others. There's a phrase spoken by Cardinal Robert Sarah, a respected theologian and spiritual leader, that captures your journey. Silence is not an absence, but a presence, not a void, but a fullness. You lived in that kind of silence, and while others saw absence, God was pouring fullness into you. That fullness is now your fragrance. They see your glow, but they missed the wilderness. They feel your peace, but they never watched your war. And you no longer need them to, because the one who matters saw it all. And heaven is still echoing with the weight of your yes in the quiet. There's a woman named Eliana, a midwife who lost her own child, but still delivers hope into the arms of strangers every day. She says nothing, but holds new life, with hands once clenched in grief. Her presence brings calm no training could teach. That's what healing looks like when it's real, when it's holy. That's what your presence carries now, redemption in action. You've become the kind of person who can walk into chaotic rooms and shift the atmosphere without saying a word. Why? Because you're not rehearsing your identity anymore. You're revealing it. And it's not built on applause. It's built on authenticity. Like the oak tree that survived lightning, you stand tall, not in spite of what burned you, but because of it. There are charred scars beneath your bark, but your roots go deep. And now birds find shelter in your branches, others find shade in your stillness. Why does peace follow you like a shadow? Why does favor chase you, even in stillness? Why does your presence stir conviction in those who never believed in healing? Because God has certified you in silence. You didn't forge your identity in the spotlight. You discovered it in the shadows. When Paul said in 2 Corinthians 12:10, "For when I am weak, then I am strong," he wasn't glorifying struggle. He was describing the mystery you now embody. Strength, born in surrender. Clarity, born in chaos. Identity, born in intimacy with God. Chosen one. The enemy's strategy was never just about wounding you. It was about distorting you. He wanted you to become what hurt you, but instead, you became the antidote. He wanted you to replicate pain, but instead, you radiate peace. He wanted you bitter, but you became a blessing. You are now the evidence that transformation is not about becoming someone else, but about becoming more of who you truly were all along. And because you stayed true, because you chose purity, when no one was watching, God is about to place in your hands something no counterfeit can hold: legacy, eternal impact, generational authority, open doors that no man can shut. Why? Because he can trust someone who's been in the fire and came out carrying the flame, not the smoke. You changed, but you never lost your soul. You rose, and you still reflect him. That is your power. That is your proof. Chapter 7. You are a walking, breathing testimony. Chosen one, Let's begin where others fail to look, not at your achievements, but at your existence. You're not just here, you're here with light, with clarity, with something sacred resting on you, and that is no accident. Your life has become something even the skeptics can't fully explain. How is it that someone who has endured what you did still walks in peace? What kept you from collapsing when the weight of life pressed so hard it should have crushed you? While others search for signs in the clouds, you are the sign walking among them. You, someone who should have been a cautionary tale, now a living parable. Consider the story of Joseph in Genesis 50-20, thrown into a pit, sold by his own brothers, falsely accused, and imprisoned. Yet, in the end, Joseph tells them, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Isn't that what your life has become? Proof that no evil scheme can override divine intention. They thought you'd lose yourself in the pain. They assumed trauma would distort you beyond recognition. But instead, you became clearer. Instead of echoes of bitterness, your soul began to sing again. Why does your presence carry so much weight when you enter a room? Why do people pause, unable to explain why they feel safer, softer, clearer around you? It's because you carry residua not of suffering but of redemption. Cardinal Raniero Cantalamessa, the preacher to the papal household, once said, "The world doesn't need more arguments, it needs more witnesses." You are that witness, not because you preach, but because you've endured without losing reverence. You've rebuilt without needing revenge. You've been in the pit and returned with water for others. And when people try to dismiss your strength, you smile not in pride, but in knowing, because you remember those nights when you were barely breathing, yet still whispered, "I believe," because you know Psalm 34-18 firsthand. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. No, there's a woman named Leora, a nurse who once stood in the rubble of a hospital, bombed in a conflict zone. She had lost patients, friends, nearly her own life, and yet she returned to serve. When asked why, she said, "Because if I don't, the darkness wins." She never quoted scripture, but she lived it. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:21. What gives someone that kind of strength? How do you rebuild from ashes while still tending to other people's wounds? How do you smile with scars that still sting in the rain? It's because God doesn't just heal, He reintroduces. He didn't just restore you, He made your return undeniable, much like Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times and wept bitterly, yet later became the rock upon which Christ built the church. Matthew 16:18. His failure wasn't the final chapter. Yours wasn't either. You walk now in a calm that unsettles the world. You speak little, but presence surrounds you like a still lake at dawn, soothing, yet powerful, like an ancient oak rooted in a battlefield. You've seen storms, yet you offer shade. Why do some people break and never return, while you emerged more alive, more whole, more you? Because your transformation wasn't cosmetic, it was cellular. It wasn't built for applause, it was built for the kingdom. Artist and trauma survivor Tracy Emin once said, "People think my work is about pain. It's about hope." The same can be said of your life. They see the shadows, but miss the light rising behind you. Someone like Eliasa, janitor, who was mute for 15 years after childhood abuse, never raised his voice again, but in silence. He cleaned every hallway of the community center with worship music in his ears. He couldn't speak, but people cried in his presence. They didn't know why. They only knew peace followed him like a fragrance. That's what you carry. Not noise, not defense. Presence. A presence shaped in fire and gentled by mercy. A life that testifies louder than any sermon. You are the book skeptics can't close. You are the page doubters can't turn away from. And your story still has chapters waiting to be revealed. You were never called to be perfect, only to remain present. And here you are, still whole, still shining, still carrying light where life tried to snuff it out. You're not just someone who was healed. You've become healing to others. Not just someone chosen, but a confirmation that the choosing was divine. Not just favored, but the visible fruit of faith that refused to die under pressure. In a world addicted to performance and polish, you carry something they can't replicate, something that can't be staged. You walk with a quiet authenticity, with the gravity of witness. People feel it when you enter the room. The atmosphere shifts. There's a reverence in the air, a subtle hush. What they're sensing is not charisma, it's glory. And it didn't come cheap. That glory was birthed through suffering and refined in silence. The way you keep showing up with love after loss, the way you still smile from a place of sincerity after rejection, that's not something the world taught you. That's what God grew in you when no one was looking. That's the divine in full display. Quietly wrapped in human skin, you don't speak it often, but your story speaks without your mouth. You are the chapter that couldn't be erased, the song that didn't go silent, the altar that still burns with holy fire. You are the miracle they never saw coming. There are people who ask, how could someone who's lost so much still radiate peace? But they're asking the wrong question. The answer isn't in what you lost, but in what survived. You didn't lose your reverence. You didn't lose your essence. That kind of resilience isn't ordinary. It's sacred. Viola Ludzow, a housewife and mother of 5 from Detroit, left her home in 1965 and drove to Selma to join the civil rights movement. She didn't have public platform or powerful backing, but she had conviction. She was killed by white supremacists while transporting black marchers. Her story is rarely told. But her legacy breathes. She became the proof that love will always drive farther than fear, like you. She didn't preach from a stages, preached through action. And then there's Keel, the hospice nurse from New Hampshire. Quiet, average, overlooked. No social media, nor awards. But every patient he served died with dignity, knowing they were seen and loved. One woman told her family, "This man carries heaven in his voice. No seminary, no spotlight, just consistent presence." Keel's life is a parable. God still moves through those who choose to stay soft in a world that's gone numb. You remind me of Hannah, who poured out her anguish in the temple, 1 Samuel 1:10, and still returned, still trusted, still gave back to God what he gave her. Like her, your strength is not in outward noise, but in quiet surrender. Your laughter now carries the weight of what you waited for in silence. Like Jesus transfigured on the Mount, Matthew 17:2. You shine not because of what's around you, but because of who is within you. Corrie ten Boom, who survived the Holocaust and still preached forgiveness, once said, "There is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still." You walk in that depth. Your scars speak that gospel. Your very breath preaches that kind of mercy, like the cedar tree that withstood lightning, flood, and drought. You've become rooted, not just in strength, but in memory. You carry living proof. You embody what Psalm 27:13 whispers, "I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. That confidence lives in your stillness, in your eyes. So when someone asks why you still walk in softness, the real answer is hidden in a lifetime of private battles, of tears on prayer floors, of choosing forgiveness over revenge and purity over performance. What they see now is just the surface. What God built was in the depths. He didn't just restore your function, He refined your essence. You don't need a microphone to declare the truth. Your steps are the sermon. Your gentleness is the theology. Your integrity is the prophecy. When someone asks for proof of God, they don't always need fire from heaven. Sometimes they just need to stand near you. You are the evidence that miracles still move, that grace still reaches, that the Spirit still dwells. Isaiah 60:1 isn't just a verse, it's your instruction. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. No, chosen one, you don't have to explain anything. You already are the explanation. Let the world try to decode your glow. Let them study your peace. Let them marvel at your survival. The truth is not up for debate anymore. God is real, and you are the proof. Chosen one, in a world that questions, debates, and demands evidence of the divine, you are heaven's answer. You don't just tell people God is real, you show them. Every step you've taken, every scar you've survived, every breakthrough that came after the breakdown, it all testifies that God didn't leave, didn't change, and didn't lie. Your life is not a coincidence. It is a prophecy in motion, a living sermon that preaches without a pulpit, a vessel of glory wrapped in everyday humanity. When people doubt the existence of miracles, they need only look at your life, because what you carry is not manufactured, it's imparted. It's the residue of wrestling with God and coming out with not just answers, but anointing. So walk boldly, live loudly in peace, in truth, in love. Let your presence interrupt despair. Let your story crack open the hardened hearts. Let your light shine in such a way that even the most skeptical soul starts to feel a tug towards something holy. Because when you rise, something in others starts to believe again. If this message stirred your spirit, if you felt the truth of it down in your bones, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video to let the algorithm know heaven is still moving. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are not forgotten. Comment below. What part of this word spoke to you the loudest? Subscribe and tap the bell icon so you don't miss the next prophetic release. God is speaking, and you are part of the remnant that still listens. If you feel led to sow into this word, you can support through the super thanks button. It helps me keep pouring out what heaven is saying. But whether you give or not, know this: you are deeply seen, deeply loved, and your presence here matters. Thank you for being part of this sacred space. And now, I speak this over you. May the God who kept you silent now speak through your life. May your scars become songs of healing for others. May you walk in rooms where your presence alone shifts the atmosphere. May your life continue to prove that even in a doubting generation, God still reigns. May blessings overtake you, favor locate you, and peace wrap around you like armor. You are not just part of the story, you are the sign. God is real because you're still here. Until next time, stay radiant, stay rooted, stay chosen. Blessings and glory to you always.